Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Hill Beyond, insightful conversations with our alumni. I'm your host, Zach Lehman, headmaster here at the Hill. We're on our fifth out of 6 editions of Hill Beyond. It's March 2nd, 2021. It's been a busy week here at Hill. We just repopulated campus for the spring term. Here you can see students checking in, moving into upper school. We have about 400 kids on campus this week, moving back into their dorm rooms, seeing friends. We're in a quiet period right now where our students are on their second of 3 days taking classes from the dorms with sort of limited activities outside of the dorm, just to firm up our bubble here on campus. So an exciting time to restart the 14-week spring term. Tonight, we're going to the West Coast to meet with Nicole Burns, class of 2005, for more than a Google search. And let's learn a little bit about Nicole. Nicole Burns, also known as Nikki when she was at the Hill School, is a strategic partnership development manager at Google. Originally from Newburgh, New York, Nicole arrived at the Hill as a third form student in the fall of 2001. Nicole was a member of the chamber choir at Hill, and in her 5th form year, she joined the track team and quickly discovered her immense talent as a sprinter. She graduated as the school record holder in the indoor 55 and 400 meter dashes and the outdoor 200 and 400 meter dashes. She still holds school records in the indoor 55 and the outdoor 200 and 400. Those records are going to stand for a while, I believe. Nicole continued her standout track career at Brown University, where she won multiple Ivy League heptagonal championships and still holds the women's indoor 200 meter dash record. She earned her BA from Brown and obtained her MBA from the Tuck School of Business at the notorious Dartmouth College. We like people from Dartmouth. Prior to Google, Nicole worked at JP Morgan Chase for 6 years across a diverse set of functions, including strategy, finance, and operations. In her current role at Google, Nicole leads Google Pay's efforts to launch mobile transportation and access solutions globally. She currently lives in Oakland, California with her fiance and Cavapoo puppy, Duke. In her free time, Nicole enjoys cooking, running, hiking, not hikers, hiking, and Lakers basketball. All right, Nicole, I promised you that we'd embarrass you a little bit. Here you are in some of your dial photos. There's your 6th form picture. Oh, someone's connecting here. Some pictures here with some friends. Looks like maybe going to the 6th form dance. All right, looking pretty good there. Yep, and that is all the pictures I have. So Nicole, could you start your video here? I'll do the same here with mine. There we go.
That is awesome.
So
wow.
Those are some pretty good pictures, right? When was the last time you
those are some serious throwbacks. Thank you.
Was I right? Was that your 6th form dance?
I don't think that was the dress I wore 6th form. I think that was maybe 5th form dance. Yeah.
Got it. Well, yes. It looks pretty good.
You definitely captured the crew. Those are definitely the folks that you would see me around campus with.
Well, as I shared, your professional name or your full name is Nicole, but you went by Nikki. We had a long conversation about whether we're going to use Nikki or Nicole tonight. I'll right. Probably bounce back and forth, but if your friends are on here, and I'm assuming that a number of your classmates and people from your era at Hill are joining us tonight. And why wouldn't they? Lots to hear about tonight. So when was the last time you were back on campus, Nicole?
Ooh, I think it was for my 5-year reunion.
Okay, so
Yeah,
you're
it's been a
due.
while.
Yeah,
I'm overdue.
yeah,
And unfortunately, the 10-year reunion got delayed.
yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah. Well, you're welcome back anytime. Do you still have family on the East Coast?
I do. Yes. So actually, that was wow. Was that our 15 years last year?
15 year, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Time flies.
Wow. Okay. Yes. So yes, my folks are still on the East Coast. So my parents, originally everyone's from New York. They actually moved and they're retired in South Carolina, Myrtle Beach. So the weather is much better for them down there. And then I have 2 older brothers who are still in New York.
And what drew you to Hill in the first place? How did you find out about Hill or boarding school in general? And why did you choose Hill?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Zach, I think leading up to just even knowing what like a Hill school is, right? There were a lot of sort of decisions that my parents made over time as it relates to my educational opportunities. So I grew up in New York in a town called Newburgh, upstate, outside of the city. At a certain point, my parents realized that basically I was not going to be able to achieve my greatest potential if I continued to stay in the local system. So they stepped out on faith a bit and they learned from a church friend that there was a school called Tuxedo Park
Oh, yeah.
where I could go and take, an academic scholarship test to see if I could be admitted. Tuxedo Park School really sort of changed the course of my educational journey forever. It was there, right, grades 5 through 8, where I was introduced to Latin and French, and introduced to sports like skiing and field hockey and lacrosse, sports that, young Black children really are not introduced to at that age. And so at the point of hitting 8th grade at Tuxedo, you have to make a choice. Do you want to continue to stay for 9th grade or do you want to look to start high school somewhere else? And that's where my parents learned that the best next step for me would be to look for independent schools. They learned that through Tuxedo Park and were very much so advised to go and kind of go down that path of boarding school options. For me, it came down to Lawrenceville and Hill. I actually really loved Lawrenceville. It was a little bit closer to home.
I'm sorry,
But funny enough,
you're breaking up, Nicole. You're
I
breaking
know,
up.
breaking up,
Can't
breaking
hear
up.
you. Something's wrong with the connection. You really loved Lawrenceville? Come on.
I did. I did. I really loved the Hill School as well. And when we came together as a family, it really boiled down to the close knit classroom, the structure, the rules. My parents were kind of like, okay, I'm sending you off at such a young age. Like, I really want to make sure that you're taken care of. And we felt that vibe at the Hill School, and they trusted that that would be the place where I'd really thrive. So that's the journey, and how, we even learned about the Hill School and then got to the Hill.
And then you proceeded to beat Lawrenceville in track every year.
That I did.
So there was no love lost once you got here. No, just kidding.
Right.
So you arrive as a third former, I'm guessing, 14 years old, a bit of
Right.
a fish out of water. You'd had some independent school experience at Tuxedo Park, but Hill was a very different place. Still relatively new to girls at that point, right? You're just a couple of years, maybe 3 years at that point of girls. So still girls probably making up 20 to 30% of the student body, not quite getting there yet.
Yeah.
And what was that first experience like for you arriving? Did you instantly find friends and fall into good, rapport with faculty members, or did it take a while?
I think it's the way in which the sort of onboarding program is set up. Like, you're in the dorms, you have a roommate, you have, your different little dormitory chapters and things like that. I think it was, I don't want to say easy to find friends, but yes, like definitely found friends who had similar interests across arts and sports and different things. And then, yeah, the faculty was very much so inviting and welcoming to the new students. And although I don't remember all of the details, it's been quite some time, I do recall feeling like the family unit was set up in such a way that you felt you had supports and people that you could go and talk to if you needed, additional help.
And how good of a job did we do with that third form roommate? Was that like a perfect match and you stayed together for 4 years and you're best friends to this day? Or was it like butting heads the whole time?
It was okay. It was somewhere in the middle. Yeah.
Somewhere in the middle. We should check the participant list to see if that person. No, I'm just kidding. Well, that's cool. But then obviously from, as you said, the crew, you made some really strong, lasting relationships with people over time. Did you find that those relationships mostly came from dorm, the classes, the clubs? Where were you building those relationships for the most part?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. It's the dorms, it's the activities, the things that I was interested in. So dance and sports, as well as I sang in the chamber choir and the Hill trebles. So I found my groups really across all the various areas that I was passionate about on campus.
Now, wait, you said dance. What was
Yes,
the dance? We
the
didn't have
dance was
dance class.
the step crew. So Nikita Marshall had us out there doing step.
Cool.
So yeah, and then
That still
listen,
exists to
like,
this day. We still have the step
oh
crew.
really?
Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah, it's pretty big, and they usually perform. Well, now we have a dance academic dance program, intro and advanced dance, and we do this year we've had afternoon dance because of COVID, and so we now have 3 dance recitals a year, plus the Lawrenceville Pep Rally, and Step usually gets involved in for sure in the pep rally, but also in some of the dance recitals. So you'd like to come back for an alumni performance? We can.
No thanks.
Come on, for your 15th reunion delayed by a year, we can recreate your finale or something like that. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, we'll see.
How about the faculty relationships? What path did you go down, if any, in terms of where you really went deep academically? Like, were there certain areas that really drew your interest at that time?
So I was not that great in the sciences. I remember that very well. I think I lean more towards like the English classes, French, religious studies, things that kind of stayed away from the statistics and the chemistry lab requirements. All other things I very much so loved and enjoyed, but definitely was challenged when it came to those lab requirements.
Was there a faculty member, like an advisor, that stood out, someone that really helped transform your experience?
There were many people. I would say, like, I had a very close bond with Mr. Peters, for example, who was our chamber choir lead and Hill trebles. But I think, yeah, across the board, like, there were just many people who were there sort of cheering me on. I'm not going to call out specific names, but yeah, there were people who I felt like I could trust and go to, and were very much so sort of sponsoring me to make sure that I was doing well.
And one of the things in the bio that I read, it sort of indicated that you discovered track. Like, you had no idea that you were super fast and just like put on a pair of sneakers and suddenly you could go, or was that something that you'd been sort of knew about yourself but had never done it formally?
So this is funny. I shared that I went to Tuxedo Park School, was introduced to all these sports, field hockey, lacrosse, played basketball. I came to Hill thinking like, oh, I'll just continue all those things. And I had no hand-eye coordination and just wasn't good at those things, but I was actually just fast. And so I discovered that it might actually be better for me to just use that speed and be intentional about that, right, in one sport. So I remember trying out for the winter indoor track team, and all of a sudden it was like everything just transformed. Like, oh wait, I'm actually kind of good at this, and so it became a passion of mine.
Right.
And yeah, it really turned sort of the course of me even thinking about colleges, right? Because now it was not only was I looking for college from an academic standpoint, but I was like, oh, I want to continue running. And then I started getting recruiting interest, right, for schools and track teams. So everything very much so changed. And it really was late in the game, which is junior year, whereas most people start running track like very young, and they're hyper focused on that. So this was a very interesting sort of turn of events for me.
And you said, I mentioned a bunch of records that you set. Were those like in the last meet of your sixth form year that you set them, or did you set them fairly early on and you just sort of coasted after that?
I actually don't recall what year those records were posted, but I do think, again, I started in junior year, so it was kind of pretty early on, I would think, that those records got posted.
Oh, the track
And
coach.
now I want to know. I wrote down that so someone broke the 400 indoor record, so I need to meet who that person is.
Track them down. Like, we want to find out who that is. Yeah. I can get that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I think Nate Yinger, our sports information director, is actually on the call. He'll have that information by the time we get to the Q&A, I'm sure. He's also a track coach, so we'll know that pretty shortly here. Well, that must have been amazing. I just can imagine being the track coach and suddenly, like, this young woman who's been at the school for 2 years just shows up to try out,
right.
setting records during tryouts or something. That must have been quite a moment. Well, that's very cool. So you end up at Brown, and things sort of just continue to grow from there. Obviously, you're doing track, but your academic interests start to change, or they pretty much stay the same, and you sort of go down that liberal arts road, or did you start to find that you could also be more statistical and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I mean, the mathematics requirements were definitely there regardless of whatever track you decided to go down. When I got to Brown, I decided to join the Commerce, Organizations, and Entrepreneurship track. And it's basically like business and econ, right? But most folks may know, like, Brown has this kind of very open structure of courses, and you can test and try things without having to commit to being graded on them. So yeah, I did what they had called COE at the time. And yeah, that really helped me go down the path of knowing that I wanted to go into business. So I had to study all the finance, the econ, but also think about, like, what does it take, right, to start a business from the ground up. So there were a lot of really cool entrepreneurship classes that I took there. So that was really my focus. And I knew, graduating from Brown, that I wanted to be in the business sector. I wasn't 100% sure what that looked like at the time, but that was kind of the goal.
Yeah. And did you find that Brown had the same kind of community that you had found at Hill? Or was it a totally different environment? My brother
very much so.
I sort of know a little bit about Brown, but how did it feel?
Yes, very much so. I absolutely loved Brown. It's like one of my favorite things to talk about. But yes, the school is there's just like a very liberal, hippie, open culture on that campus where whatever you're passionate about, you can find a group of people who are also, aligned and have similar interests with you. And, like, you just try to go and, like, solve the world's problems together. So it was a ton of fun. It was there, right, where I continued being a student athlete. That became a large part of my time, balance that with school. Also, while there, helped to found an organization called Making Moves, which goes back to my passion around, like, education and sports. Essentially, what we did was we helped mentor and tutor high school student athletes in the local Providence high schools, brought them up to our campus. These are, majority Black students, right? And allowed them to see, like, here's what it is, right? Like, you can achieve this, but by the way, it's not just about your athleticism. Like, you got to have everything else sort of ticked and tied off on in terms of, your testing and your homework and all those things. So it was sort of like a big brother, big sister program in that sense. And I love that. I also pledged a historically Black organization there, became a Delta. So just had a fascinating, very well-rounded experience. And I was there at the time when President Ruth Simmons was in office there. And she is the first African-American president of an Ivy League institution. And so it really very much so felt like home, having someone who looks like me being in charge.
Right.
So definitely really loved it.
And does that organization that you've helped to found, does it still exist at Brown, or has it gone beyond Brown? Or
No, I don't think it still exists, unfortunately, because everyone kind of graduated and moved on. But what I have noticed is the folks who were involved in that are still continuing to do work that's very much so related. So I now sit on a board of an organization called Positive Tracks that's focused on sweat activism. So having, youth sort of leverage that interest that they have around sport for good, raising funds to contribute to organizations and issues that they care about. So I see that across all of my friends who were also student athletes at Brown, like very much so aligned and doing
that
things like
common
that
bond
today.
is still there. Well, as I
It's there, yeah.
predicted, it didn't take us much time here. We have the record breakers. Mr. DeLucia has shared with us the 100 meters was broken by a current sixth former, Sydney Floyd. Sid Floyd broke that.
Love it.
She had 12.63. So I'm not sure what your
the
time.
100 meter. Yeah, that's awesome.
Pretty fast.
Love it. Hi, Mr. DeLucia.
Yeah,
Very cool.
I think she's going on to run at Sacred Heart last time I heard. Well, you brought up a couple of issues there talking about Brown, and I want to sort of revisit those in terms of the diversity of Brown, and maybe Hill at that time was not as diverse as we are now, was certainly moving in that direction. You raised, having a female leader of Brown being someone that, was a role model for you. Talk to us a little bit about, and spoiler alert, I know you're working closely with me and our board of trustees right now on our DEI task force. So, we're engaging that part of your experience, but can you talk to our audience a little bit about what it was like being an African-American young woman at Hill, and how that changed, if it did change when you went to Brown, and what you learned from that experience?
Yeah. It's important to note that all throughout my various sort of educational steps and into my career, I have been a one, right? I have been a one of very few. Even at the Hill School, I could count on both hands the number of Black classmates that I had in the class of '05. And very much so went through experiences where I was called, right? Makita or Lindsay, right? And I look nothing like, and we look nothing like each other, right? So was definitely sort of in smaller groups, and have been in smaller groups throughout my life. So, I think what I will say is I have an understanding of what it feels like to be in marginalized groups. Like, I came into Hill as a Black young girl, was one of a few. But I also came into Hill, right, coming from a family that had very humble means, right? And so there's two things there, and there's many other intersections and things you can think about when you think about difference and how people experience where they're at. But I think those are two things that kind of stand out for me. The one was like, there just weren't that many people that looked like like me at the Hill. And there were some harder moments. There were the microaggressions. There were, the sort of vibes of privilege that came in sort of ways in which people kind of uphold systems of, oppression and things like that, that did have some lingering effects throughout different various experiences for me. And then to add to that, there's also that layer of just like, I didn't come from wealth. Like, it's not lost on anyone here that a lot of people who can afford to go to the Hill School come from very affluent backgrounds. And so, being nervous to talk to my friends about where I come from and what my parents did, like, I very much so did not invite people to come back home to my house. I was nervous to talk about those things when I was at the Hill School. I couldn't afford the Lilly Pulitzers and, the brand name clothes to keep up with sort of the pace of what people had on campus and some of those things. So it was one of the best transformative experiences that I've had in my life. And I'm very, very grateful for that sort of strength, the resiliency, the academic rigor, the ability to really find out who I was, right? That's a very vulnerable time in anyone's life. and be able to sort of continue and bring that resiliency forward as I went to Brown and further into my career. But yes, like it wasn't perfect, Zach. We've
Yeah,
talked about this.
yeah, no, I
It
get it.
wasn't perfect. And yeah, there are some harder moments that I reflect upon as well. But in the end, very, very grateful for, the bonds that I was able to form there and the experiences that I had that have very much so shaped my character today.
Well, I appreciate that honesty and transparency, and more than anything, I appreciate that you're staying involved with us and helping us to improve that for current and future generations of Hill students. So we want to make sure that does not continue to be the case for any of our students who are coming from different backgrounds, whatever they may be. So, well, it sounds like
Yep.
once you got to Brown, it was maybe a more diverse environment, more opportunities, a bigger environment. So there were more opportunities. You weren't maybe you were one of a few more.
Right. It's just a bigger school, right?
Yeah, a bigger school,
Yeah.
but also a more liberal place and
Yes,
more
for sure.
schools and that sort of thing. So then you went to New York first, or you went right to business school?
I went to New York first. So 2009 is when I graduated from Brown. It was a very tough time. I was lucky enough to, after doing an internship with JP Morgan Chase, getting an offer to come back full time and do a 2-year leadership development program. So that brought me back to New York. I did have one stint where they sent me to Columbus, Ohio, as I was rotating around that leadership program. But then after that 2 years, landed back in New York, which was an amazing time. And yeah, spent a total of 6 years at Chase.
And then went to Tuck.
And then went to Tuck. Yeah. So around year 4, I started to get the itch to go to business school. It was always one of those things that was on the bucket list for me personally. It's one of those things where it's like you can kind of use business school as a way to like completely pivot. And I wanted it because it was a bucket list item. But then I also at that point started just to think about like, how do I leverage my business background and sort of intersect that with what I actually really care about, which is more related to education reform, as well as like other nonprofit issues, racial equity, et cetera. So I went into the business school like application process, writing in my essays about, oh, I'm gonna like go do, consulting work for nonprofits. And it's funny, and a lot of people who you speak to about like business school process and recruiting and stuff will tell you the same thing. Like you come in with it one idea and then you wind up coming out doing something completely different. That is what happened to me. So yeah, went in with that plan, came out working for Google, which I'm very grateful for and really enjoy, but definitely different from what I had initially intended.
Well, we've skipped over 2 important aspects of your history here. So when you were at Brown, and maybe this predates your time at Brown, was there the silver truck and the white truck, the food trucks there? Was that famous still at Brown? Or they
The
left?
silver truck and the white.
I just remember visiting my brother, food trucks late night at Brown. And then, of course, Hanover, you had to have gone to Everything But Anchovies, EBA's, the greatest restaurant on the planet.
EBA's. Oh, it was so good. That was definitely the late night spot, and then it closed, unfortunately. But yeah, no, I don't know the truck stack, so that might be beyond my time. But yeah,
I'm dating myself.
EBA's.
All right, well, I sort of travel by food. It's always good that way. All right, so did you get recruited by Google? Like, did they come and like recruit you out of Tuck, or did you go the internship path? Like, how did you end up at Google?
Yep. So as I was mentioning, like I came in with one plan, right? So I was like, I need to get traditional consulting experience if I want to solve for this niche area, right, of education reform, et cetera. Was also recruiting for roles that align to my passion, like sports, for example, like Nike or Gatorade. And then just things that kind of aligned with the work that I know I love and enjoy. And what happened was I went through the process, had a couple offers with some different companies. Come the spring, right before the summer internship between the first year and the second year of business school, Google reaches out and they want to interview me for their payments team. I think most people just kind of drop their name in the hat for the Google internship, and you just kind of walk away because it very much so kind of seems like a black box. It's like, who knows what's going to happen? Who knows how Google actually selects people for their internship? And so that spring they reached out and I had like literally deadlines on some other offers within like 2 weeks. So I had to tell them like, listen, this is great, but we need to accelerate this interview process. So went through an accelerated interview process, did get the summer internship. And, as I compared against the other opportunities, I felt like, wow, this is very intentional that they reached out. I do have a background in payments. I worked at JP Morgan Chase. Like, this would very much so leverage my experiences, and I could probably add a lot of value for the summer. It's defined and it's Google. So like, I should probably try it. And it also, right, it was going to bring me to the West Coast, which is like something I had never imagined. I never thought I would move to the Bay Area. So yeah, so that's what happened. Landed the internship, which then led to full time.
And so now, how many years have you been at Google now?
Coming up on 4 this summer.
Okay. So,
yeah,
everyone that's listening now, they just want to know what it's like to work at Google, right? This cool, global company, a little mysterious, does pretty much everything. And you're in charge of how we all pay for things on Google, pretty much, or maybe that's but, you've got all of our credit card information there, Nicole. Tell us what it's like, if you can, in a nutshell, like, what's it like to be at Google? I mean, they are cutting edge in so many ways. And it's such a cool opportunity. What's that like? And how did your time at Hill and Brown and Tuck prepare you for that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. What is it like to be at Google? It is fast-paced. It is disorganized, although our mission is to organize the world's information and make it easy. It is, it's the type of environment where you're very much so given a lot of responsibility and trust to just go run with an assignment and figure it out. So, the culture is just very open. The work style is the same, but it's very collaborative. Like, you will not be successful at Google if you do not like to work with people, because everything needs to be a collaborative approach. I'll kind of compare it to working in finance, right, a little bit, so folks can understand. Like, I went from JP Morgan Chase, that's very structured, right? There's month-end earnings, like all these, quarterly business reviews and this and that. Everything's kind of on a TikTok schedule. You know what to expect. There's rules, there's regulations, there's procedures. You go to a company like Google and there's just nothing. Like, there's no procedures, there's no, there's obviously a ton of regulation that we always have to consider in everything that we do, but you're just expected to innovate and figure it out. So it was very different for me transitioning from finance to Google. However, to that question around like, how did the Hill prepare me and Brown and everything, I learned the structure, right, from the Hill School. I learned, I was looking at the academic schedule that you all have posted online last night as I was thinking about this, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I remember this, like 7:30 breakfast, like 30 to 40 minute, classrooms rotating, like you have these time blocks to go do your arts and sports and everything. Like, that structure actually does stick with you. So if you do transition into a world where it's a little bit ambiguous and like chaotic all the time, you just can apply that structure on top. So I have found that, the structure and just the organization and especially the written communications, I'll say, like, the Hill School really makes sure that you know how to write. The assignments are so robust at the Hill. Like, you come out, I know alum know this, like, you definitely know how to write when you leave. And so all of those different tools and things that I have picked up along the way have helped me to come into this world where it's just always evolving, and you need to be very organized and understand how you're driving impact and be able to communicate that.
And so how many people are on your team that you're collaborating with on a regular basis? How expansive is that? Are they all in the Bay Area? Are they all over the world? What does that look like?
Yeah, the team's all over the world. So I specifically work in the business development partnerships team. And that team is the front-facing business side to the product, right? The product is payments and Google Pay. So the partnerships team, their sort of cross-functional teammates are product management, engineering, legal, marketing, PR, et cetera. So the teams are all over the world. we have a team that sits in Singapore. I have teammates in EMEA, New York, all over. And so we're constantly working across time zones. But my team, specifically on my day to day, is more centered in the US. And I'm working probably across like 10 to 12 people on a daily basis.
So 10 to 12 people controlling all of the money going through Google Pay. That's pretty amazing.
Not controlling all the money,
I'm
Zach.
just kidding. I'm kidding. A question I have, and then I want to sort of open the floor because I think there's going to be a lot of questions here tonight. I travel a lot, spend a lot of time all over the world. And I've noticed that, our counterparts in other countries, especially in Asia, are have been using electronic payment, phone payment. They swipe their phone for everything, right? They QR code,
Yes.
they WeChat, they everything's on their phone. They just put it down, they walk away. But we're still slow about adopting this. What is it about the US that we're not, we're the last to adopt?
We're not there yet.
Yeah, we're not there yet. You'd think we'd be, especially with companies like Google, we'd be ahead of the curve.
So you would think so, but a lot of it is based on historical regulation that has been put into place within the payments space itself. So if you think about your checkout experience, it started off like you had to swipe your card, magnetic stripe, right? We then moved from magnetic stripe.
When I was a kid, it was like the clunk clunk, you had like carbon copies. You had to like
copy paste.
You had to like call the president of the world and say, like, can this guy spend $10 on this? Yeah.
Right. So the point is that, we went from magnetic stripe, which is just really not secure, to this chip and pin requirement, right? That became a requirement across the world for chip and pin. And, so you go from stripe to chip and pin, and then slowly, right, merchants start rolling out contactless payments, but people are still just learning that they have to do chip and pin. And so in the US, it's just been this very long delayed process of getting people from one habit to the next habit, and then providing the awareness and education that actually the contactless, the NFC symbols that you see at the merchants, that solution is actually more secure than the first two, right? Because, and I won't get into I'll actually save the technical details around it, but like it's actually more secure for you to use your Google Pay or your Apple Pay or your physical card to tap on those NFC symbols. And so the US is just very behind. It's going to take time for the habits to catch up. But what I will say is 2020 very much so accelerated contactless transactions. So they grew like twice as fast as non-contactless because of COVID. And so because of COVID, consumers are expecting to see contactless availability. They don't want to hand the card over and get it back wet and, someone try to wipe it off with hand sanitizer or even touch cash. So we have seen significant changes in the industry related to contactless.
Well, that was the question I was going to ask you. It's had to have been an accelerator for Google Pay and Apple Pay and all of those. So in some ways, that's been a silver lining for you, even though you're stuck at home looking across the Bay Bridge at your old office. But in a way, your business is going through the roof, right? Like it's getting exciting. You're doing new things.
It is.
And hopefully that consumer behavior continues from your perspective. You want people to do that. It's more secure after, post COVID, which hopefully we're getting close to, right? We hope so.
No, that's exactly right. One of the things, like obviously 2020 slowed a lot of the launches that I had planned to bring contactless solutions to market, but the interest actually increased to that point. So it is super busy. The projects are there. Everyone is trying to figure out what they can do, because if you think about it, this is a way to also sort of think through a reopening strategy for cities. Like we talked about Zach the BART and how I would take the BART, right? We announced 2 weeks ago that we are going to be launching a mobile clipper card. So that mobile clipper card allows you to get around the city without having to stand in a queue, without touching a ticket vending machine. You just use your phone, right, to do it all. So yeah, the projects are very much so there and advancing, and we're super excited to think through like how we can help the different cities get their ridership back.
Well, we're getting starting to get some good news here in Pennsylvania about the light at the end of the tunnel here with COVID, and restrictions being reduced and vaccines going up and all those kinds of things. And for us at Hill, our teachers are hoping we're about to be in this phase 1A where all of our teachers are getting vaccinated. But I do think that I'm really fascinated now that I'm sick and tired of the pandemic. I'm really fascinated to see what changes we're going to make afterwards, and how our lives maybe get even easier or more interesting, or and so that's certainly going to be one way. All right, Nikki, you ready for some questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So if you're on here, and we've got a good crowd tonight, and you want to hear from the famous Nicole Burns, there's two ways. You can either type a question into the Q&A box, which is in the bottom of your screen. Just click on that and type a question, and I can see it and read it to Nikki. Or you can raise your hand if you're bold, and we can allow you to speak, and we can even show your video if you think you have a background that you want to share. So, and you're actually, did your hair tonight like me. So first question comes from Jim Alexan, one of our board members who you know a little bit. Jim asks, you have a day off and can spend a day indulging in your passions. What would that be? What would you do with the day off? Like, any of us have a day off anymore, but give it a shot.
I know. Ooh, that's hard. It probably looks like me working with an organization that I feel really passionate about. There's Black Girls Code that is out here that's working to increase representation of Black women in CS. So, when I have those days off and I really just want to fulfill my passion, it looks like me thinking through how can I lend a hand and be helpful, provide any advice, or just kind of help with initiatives that are happening here locally in Oakland.
And do you think that goes back to your time at Brown when you started that organization, or do you think it goes back even further to sort of how you were
Further.
family?
Further. It goes from the very beginning, like I was saying, knowing that the only reason I'm here today is because my parents took a chance on, following the advice that they received at a very young age and taking that risk to send me off, right, to the prep schools and things like that. Like, a lot of people just don't know what they don't know, and they don't have access to this information. And so it's always very important for me to think about, how can I give back and share? How can I really help Black communities, just sort of further advance these efforts around closing the education gap? And then that's also very much so tied to why you'll also see me doing a lot of things related to sports, because when I think back to, my friends from Newburgh, a lot of them, they should have been in the Olympics. The times posted for the Olympics, they ran track, they're super talented, but they had a hard time getting out of the streets. They didn't have supports in place. They didn't have, the ability to kind of get out of some very difficult situations. And so for me, those two areas are always very important.
And Google is also famous for allowing its employees to do some of their own projects on Google Time, right? And
yes,
have you been able to utilize some of Google's resources to try to solve some of those
absolutely
challenges that's awesome.
Yeah, I think it's you have a platform wherever you are, right? And I'm very blessed that I have this platform, right, at Google. And so I've definitely gotten very much so involved there, was leading the affinity group called the Black Googlers Network in the San Francisco Bay Area, and thinking through just kind of what are the sort of internal needs that we have as a Black community, but then what are those external ways that we can leverage our resources to truly help Black community organizations, racial justice organizations and things like that. So I'm constantly thinking about how do we get creative? Can we make all of the wine that's distributed at the, happy hours Black-owned wine, right? So those are just the little things. If we're going to talk about, economic opportunity and really increasing that for the Black community, what can we do? And so, I have spent a lot of my 20% time. There's always, we have this 20% time, but as everyone knows, it always winds up being more. But in this space, it is important to me. So I spend as much time as I want to think through how I can support.
That's awesome. Well, we have a hand up. It's Alex, who's an alumnus. been here in the last few years. Hold on. Alex, I'm letting you talk. Can you hear me?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yeah. How you doing, Alex?
Good. How about yourself?
Good. Alex, class of 2017, 18?
16, same as your son.
Yes. It's one of our good to hear your voice. Where are you, Alex? Where are you calling from?
Back at home in New York,
Okay.
in Staten Island.
Great. You have
Nice.
questions for Nicole?
Yeah, I do. This is probably a super loaded question, but I was just reading about this the other day. I didn't even know about this Hill meeting until the other day, and I was looking about the alumni. We have our 5-year reunion coming up, so I was like looking through the webpage, and I saw you, and I was reading this article about Google and how Google Pay, which is specifically to do with you, is going to allow people to use Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. And this is kind of just something that I've started to learn about in the last 6 months to the last year. And I'm sure you know that like kids my age to your age are super interested in this kind of thing. And so my broad question is, what are the biggest struggles with launching that effort? Because I'm sure there's a lot of legal issues and et cetera that you have to jump through a bunch of loops, and I don't know.
Yeah. So Alex, I'm gonna go ahead and give the Google public PR response. I can't go into too much detail, unfortunately, related to that, but I think you can just imagine, given the type of organization that we run and the regulations that we're constantly having to abide by and be, just considerate of, that. Yes, it's not easy.
Yeah, I'm sure. That's kind of what I was at. I wanted to know the level of toughness, because I'm sure there's a lot going on.
Yeah. No, but you're right. I saw that as well. That's not my specific area of focus, but I'm glad to see that they're actually figuring that out, because I think it's going to be important, just given the trends of Bitcoin and crypto.
Yeah. Funny story, my dad's best friend teaches music at Newburgh, and so we're up there a lot.
Newburgh Free Academy?
Or high school, probably public high school, or I don't know exactly what high school, but.
Oh wow, that's cool. Yes, very small world.
I did a bunch of music too, like I was in Hill Tones and stuff, so it's cool.
Yes, Alex was quite the musician when he was here at Hill.
Yeah.
Alex, it's great to hear your voice. Glad you're asking tough questions. That's what you want.
Yeah, thanks for
you
the
to do
question.
it, Hill. And Nikki had the perfect response. Well done, both of you. All right. Thanks for calling in, Alex. Good to hear you.
You too.
All right. We have a compliment, a greetings and a question here from Mr. Dolhoff. John Dolhoff says, please tell her Liz and I say hi, her third form dorm parents. They're still here at Hill. And he wonders if you're still running.
Yes. Hi, Mr. Dolhoff. Yes, I am still running. I don't compete at the sprint capacity anymore, but I definitely still run. It's one of my passions and ways in which, I sort of manage stress and just kind of like get out of the work bubble, right? And yeah, I love sort of thinking about sort of piggybacking off of the nonprofit board that I sit on. I do tend to ask my friends, I don't know if Karen and Makita are still out there, but I ask my friends every so often to come together for like a monthly run where we'll just kind of say, okay, everyone's going to go out on this day together, right? And everyone sort of contribute what you can, and we pick a specific issue or cause for that month, and we'll just run together and do like a sweat for good activation, which I just love. It's good, especially now when it's hard to see people. You can't really gather, to sort of virtually everyone just go out and share pictures and contribute to a good cause at the same time.
Nikki, would you say that Google is like a fitness type culture, or people like glued to their computers, or like when you're out on campus, are they running and exercising and doing fit?
Yeah, there's not like one like personality of a Googler. There's everyone's just so different.
Yeah.
But what I will say is, like, pre-COVID, the campus has all of the things that you need if you want to take an hour break, go to the fitness room. So you see people doing all types of things all the time around the campus.
That's cool. Yeah, I remember I visited the campus, and a lot of volleyball, outdoor volleyball nets.
Yes, swimming, volleyball, right? Playing chess. Yeah.
They want to keep you active and healthy and working too, right? And coming up with great ideas. All right, from Kathy Skitko, another faculty member here. Great to see you, Nikki. Hill's Hobart's Run Initiative is planning its 4th Pottstown Investors Conference, and this year's theme will focus on increasing the number of Black and other person of color-owned businesses in the borough. We have some great speakers lined up, including Suleiman Rahman of Diverse Force in Philly. So please join us virtually on April 16th. So putting in a plug there. My question, drawing from your various experiences, what are the key things that Pottstown can do to encourage and support such businesses and help entrepreneurs overcome various societal and other challenges to success?
What can Pottstown do? Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably around like, where are the gaps where those organizations need support? Like, is it funding? Is it marketing? Is it PR and communications? Is it helping to sort of advertise the different, milestones and things that they're trying to achieve? It's hard to think about Pottstown, right? Like, who exactly in Pottstown are we talking about here? But yeah, I think the key is just like step up, step in. Like, if there's a call to action, figure out what the need is and try to provide support as best as possible.
Cool. We have another shout out. Go Nikki from your fiance.
Yes, love it.
There he is. Yep, supportive, perfect. And then Robert Wesley. Now this is interesting. He's a physician out in Las Vegas. Robert's class in 1967, one of our very first Black students here at Hill. So maybe he'll raise his hand. We can chat with him a little bit too. But his question for you is, and you've sort of answered this, but maybe you can add to it.
Yeah.
What in your Hill experience was most helpful in furthering your multifaceted career? From Wesley.
Yeah. And I sort of touched on it a little bit earlier, but it's really the confidence that you gain from leaving the Hill School, as well as just the rigor around the academics, the communications skills that I think I took and was able to apply. Like, when I graduated from the Hill and I transitioned to Brown, I will say felt not easy, but it felt like a seamless transition, right? Like, there's so much about like going away at 14, learning how to live in a dorm, and really going through that very rigorous academic curriculum that just sets you up for success. So there were many takeaways, but I will say, like, I felt like I had a seamless transition to college. And then from there, I just had the confidence to continue to pursue my career beyond Brown and even furthermore to where I am at today.
Yeah, we talked about the diversity of Hill, or the lack thereof, when you were at Hill, and becoming more diverse when you went to Brown. I'm not sure what Tuck was like, but Google, yeah, not that diverse.
Nah, not that much representation.
Yeah, but Google, I assume is as diverse as it gets, right? But maybe no, really. Okay, so is that? Do you think it's a step back? Is it an area that you mentioned your leadership of the Black Googlers in San Francisco? Is there more? Is Google making a real initiative here to be more diverse?
Yes. So I mean, listen, like, the representation issue is an issue across every industry. Like, I saw it in finance, like, you see it everywhere. We need to have more people that look like me in seats across the board. Very much so in tech, there is a representation issue. What I like about Google, and the reason why I enjoy still working at Google right now, is the fact that Google tries to be as transparent as possible about where they're at. Like, they were one of the first tech companies to release their diversity report that just clearly stated, here are the numbers, we're just going to be real about this is where we are. But, one of the things that they have done more recently, and everything that happens at Google is public, so I'm pretty sure folks would see the headlines all the time too, but Google made a very public commitment to racial equity this past year. And of course, like, I can kind of laugh at, like, there were a lot of sort of allyship uh, things that came up last summer, right, surrounding all of the violence that the police sort of had, essentially people were dying at the hands of police, right? And people are still not receiving justice for it. And you saw a lot of organizations step up and say what they were going to do. Some of it came off genuine, some of it not. What I like about Google is that when they say they're going to do something, they are very transparent about how they're going to sort of track and measure it. They make it clear, they state it publicly, and they put the experts and they put supports and resources up against it. So internally, they are focused on, increasing Black plus representation, looking at the hiring piece of it, retention, addressing issues of inclusion, making sure that marginalized groups do feel included at Google and that they have a similar experience that their white counterparts can, right? But then externally, they've also made a huge commitment to economic opportunity, spending money with Black-owned businesses, building products for change so that products can work for everyone, not just white men. And then, really sort of focused around supporting racial justice organizations and closing the gap that's related to seeing Black people in STEM and CS. So a lot of things going on at Google, and you can tell I'm passionate about it. So I try to lean in where I feel comfortable.
Well, here's a great question that just came in the chat box, which is from Cam asks, what is your best advice to my son as a Black boy looking to enter 9th grade at the Hill, who's also very interested in technology?
Yeah.
That's a good question, right?
That is a good question. Yeah, I think so. My advice to your Black son looking to enter, first thing, like, related to being Black, I'll say, like, just to your son, like, just don't be afraid to advocate for what you know is right. I think that's one piece of advice I will share. I think when I was 14 at the Hill, there were some things that I felt comfortable sharing, but there were a lot of things that I didn't. And as much as I can encourage your son to have the confidence to, like, really speak up when things are not right, and if they're not having the experience that they hope for, yeah, like, I think that's just number one. But then, interest in tech, like, continue to be curious about what's going on. There's so much happening across many different aspects of tech right now. So if you are interested in pursuing the type of career, I would just make sure that you're tuning in to the earnings calls and, like, making sure that you're subscribed to different news channels where you can really just, like, try to keep the pace of the different changes, because it's always changing, and it's fascinating, the different type of innovation that's going on right now. So continue to be curious, and then you'll be ready to go when you have to interview in several years.
Well, STEM was not really a thing. I mean, we didn't really have that acronym when you came to Hill. And now brand new Shirley Quadrivium Center, which is all about STEM. Do you remember having some technology experiences when you were at Hill, that good or bad? Like,
a little bit. I don't think we had the sophisticated center at that time. I'm pretty sure we didn't. But I do recall, like, I do recall having to learn certain, like, lightweight learning some languages that you would need to do, like, macros and stuff like that when you're working on stats and other sort of computational classes. But yeah, I don't think it was as advanced as it is today.
So your STEM career came much later. Well,
yeah.
We're basically at the end of our hour, and we've answered most of our questions. Nicole, thank you so much for sharing your experience at Hill, and again, thank you for your willingness to come back and help us get better at Hill, and your involvement with the DEI task force and some other things. Oh, well, your friend's getting the last word here, so you ready? Hi, Nikki. So proud of you and all you've accomplished as someone who has done so much at such a young age.
Hey, Kita.
You are always thinking about your next step. When you think about what your legacy will be on this earth, and it's a great question to end on, what is most important to you, and how do you want to leave your mark?
Very good question, Kita. Yeah. I think for me, it's not so much so about, the impact that I was able to drive for, these billion user products. It's more about how did I plant seeds along the way to help people just think about things differently? I think what's most important is I feel like whatever spaces I'm in, I'm always sort of trying to push the conversation related to Nikita, like racial equity, and asking people like, what are you, doing to continue to uphold, right, these sort of systems of oppression, and like just pushing those questions forward. Like I want people to remember me as the one who, didn't sit back, was interested in stepping up, was not afraid to just kind of share like what is going well and what's not going well, and it's those initiatives that I'm most proud of. So I'm working on a product inclusion sort of effort right now, and that's something that I care about, and would want people to remember me for as I sort of continue on. It's those things that really sort of make the more meaningful differences and focus on Black communities that I care about the most.
So such a great answer for such a great question and a great note to end on. Well, let's before we end, let's go back to those pictures, Nicole. Pretty good, right? Like
Oh,
living large.
wow.
The hair, it's looking good. I'm impressed. All right, well,
Thanks.
Nicole Burns has been awesome. Next week, we wrap up this series, which has been a ton of fun, with Pinckney Benedict, class of 1982, who's an author and screenwriter, and he's going to talk a little bit about his writing career, and talk a little bit about his growing up in the Appalachians. So, Nicole, thank you for joining us. Thanks to everyone who came on tonight and listened, asked questions.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, it's been awesome, and I look forward to. I think we have our next task force meeting on Wednesday afternoon. Tomorrow, geez, coming up quick. We'll be there.
Indeed.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Well, thanks for
night.
the opportunity.
Yeah, you bet.
All right. Take care.
Thank you. Good night.